Welcome Mr. James here with us today.
Good job. Can y'all hear me up there? Am I talking loud enough? Okay, good. As he was saying, I am an IP counsel for GE Oil and Gas. Just to give you a little flavor of what we do, we primarily manufacture equipment for the oil and gas industry. GE is obviously much bigger, 300,000 employees. We make jet engines, we make healthcare products, we make gas turbines, we make energy plants, we make locomotives. The list goes on, but I work in the oil and gas division. We have 40,000 employees. Roughly 7,000 of them are engineers and scientists that work on projects. Over the last several years, we've invested over $5 billion in R&D work, which leads to, obviously, a lot of innovation, and that's what I'm dealing with on a daily basis, of how do we protect that innovation. One way we do that is through patents. We've got over 12,000 of them in our portfolio. Another way that we do that is through trademarks. We've got over almost 2,000 of those in our portfolio. But those are just kind of two of the ways. There's a whole lot of other ways that we try and protect our intellectual property, and that's what I want to talk to y'all a little bit about, help educate a little bit in terms of what IP rights are and how you can use them. Has anybody seen this before? No hands. Anybody go to the Little Dewey? Obviously, somebody's had barbecue at the Little Dewey here, more than those numbers. So this was on the wall in the Little Dewey, right by the soda fountain in the back, and I found it was thought that it was interesting in terms of the things that it had on it: ideas, goodwill, imagination, leadership. I thought it was interesting that it didn't have hard work on there. I thought that would be should be number one on the list of hard work. But one of the things that when you're dealing with intellectual property is these ideas and goodwill. Right? And so if you're going to put all this hard work in order to build a successful company or a successful product, and you're going to have all these ideas and all this goodwill that you're going to be generating, you've got to find a way to protect it. Because the last thing you want to be able to do, right, is have this product and you go put it out on the market, and then 15 minutes later, there's 10 copycats that are selling the exact same thing. So how do you protect it? How do you ensure all that goodwill? How do you make money off of it if you decide that you're not going to sell those products anymore? So those are the things that we'll talk a little bit about today. Now, I know y'all have a Q&A process, but if you've got a question while I'm talking, shout it out, raise your hand. I'm happy to entertain those as we go. So why is IP important? So with a company like GE, everything that we make, everything that we do, IP is at the heart of it. We spend billions of dollars a year, as I was pointing out before, coming up with these new products and services. So the last thing that we want is our competitors being able to either stop us from making that product or make a product that's going to compete with ours. So we're constantly looking at that IP landscape, trying to understand what we do better and how we can protect it better. When we look at that, we consider it one of our most valuable assets. If you look at companies, and this is the S&P 1000. Since 1975, intangible property. So your intangible property are things like your patents, your trademarks, your goodwill that you generate because of the brand. Those are all things that are intangible property. In 1975, 17% of a company's value was intangible property. And that has consistently grown over the last 40 years to the last number that we have in 2015. It's now 84% of a company's value. So when you look at the valuation of a company, it is predominantly based on intangible assets, and that's your intellectual property. Your patents, your copyrights, your trademarks, your trade secrets, the goodwill that you generate from all those things. And when you've got a company whose value is primarily on intangible assets, you're going to figure out a way to protect it, right? Because otherwise, you're going to lose a lot of value for your company quick. And when you look at a company like GE, we're one of the few companies that have been on the Dow since the beginning. And that's one of the things that we're constantly doing is protecting our IP so we can stay on that list and make sure that we're continually innovating And we've got some entrepreneurial things that we're doing, so there's some things that we're doing to try and stay lean, nimble, and fast to do those things. When you look at brands, so this is kind of playing off of that earlier slide that I was talking about, right? So when you look at the most valuable brands in the world, this was one from Forbes. I think this was in the last 2 years. I can't remember which list I pulled this off of. Either 2013 to 2015 when this list came out. The estimate of the value of these brands. Everyone on the list right here, the brand is worth at least $30 billion or more, just for the brand name, right? The ability to slap that G monogram on a refrigerator, on a piece of equipment, that Goodwill that's associated with it, $30 billion. Top of the list, Apple, over $100 billion associated with just their name. And that's because they have been innovative, they've come out with products that people want, they've grown consistently, and they do a lot to protect their brand. So all these companies, they're always looking out at how do we protect that brand, how do we continue to grow that value. So one thing that I haven't talked a whole lot about are trade secrets. So when you hear about intellectual property, most people probably start thinking about patents, right? You know, they want to wave their patent around, and they're proud about the fact that they've got a patent on their idea. But patents, while there are a lot of them out there and they're in the news a lot and they sound kind of sexy, they are just one way to protect. Probably the bigger thing is trade secrets. Trade secrets, one of the latest estimates that I've seen, are estimated to be worth $5 trillion. So in the S&P 1000, all those companies combined together, the value of their trade secrets they have are estimated to be $5 trillion. That's about a quarter of the gross domestic product. If you converted it into pennies, you could fill 2.5 Empire State Buildings full of pennies to get the $5 trillion. So IP, all of this, I'm just trying to drive home the fact that IP is valuable, and you need to have a plan at the outset on how you're going to protect it. So one of the things that they said that you guys would want to hear a little bit is my journey, how I got to where I am, some of the things that I've experienced during that time. So, you know, I did go to Mississippi State. I was born in Fort Benning, Georgia, back in the late 60s. My father was a drill sergeant at Fort Benning. Spent a couple of tours at somebody. I see somebody. Anybody been to Fort Benning? My dad was a drill sergeant there back in the 60s. Spent a tour or two in Vietnam. I was there until the mid-70s, until my father decided that it was time to move back home where he was from, which was Arkansas. Went to elementary school, junior high, high school in Arkansas. So really grew up in Arkansas. And somehow I avoided becoming a Razorback. I just didn't understand the whole Woo Pig Suey thing. Didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I've got some very good friends that obviously went to school at Fayetteville. I was probably going to go to school to Fayetteville had it not been for my father, who kept saying, "Hey, what about those flyers that you keep getting from Mississippi State? Why don't we go down there one day?" And so the week before the last orientation session, my dad somehow got me into the car, drove me down to Starkville, saw the campus, and fell in love with it. And so decided to come here at the last minute, made it to the last orientation session, and then spent my 4 years here, mainly at Etheridge. Sloan wasn't here, so I was over at Etheridge doing chemical engineering. And then one day I was sitting in the lounge at Etheridge, and kind of hard to see that. One of the professors that I worked for came up to me and said, "James, one of my former students is over in career services, and there's been a mix-up. He wanted chemical engineering students to come and interview. Career services put up the sign and they put chemistry majors. So he hadn't had anybody to talk to. Can you go talk to him?" do you have your resume? And I happened to have my resume with me, and I was dressed like y'all. I had my hat on, my sunglasses and T-shirt, so I went for an interview dressed like that. And the next thing you know, I got a job from the gentleman working on one of these things. And it's kind of hard to see what it is, but it's a paper machine. So I spent the next 10 years starting out as a process engineer, working in a pulp and paper facility. Started up one of the largest de-inking facilities where we took old magazines and newspapers and turned them back into newsprint. Spent many a night bringing donuts to the press rooms to talk with the folks using our paper. As I grew through that, I became a control systems engineer and was the control systems superintendent. So everything that had a computer hooked up to it in that plant that operated it, my team worked on. But if you know anything about pulp and paper, it's been a little bit on the down hillside, especially in urban areas like Houston, where I was located. Saw the handwriting on the wall that plant was probably going to close, so I decided to make a turn. But before I did that, the one thing that I would say about working in that paper mill was I learned to listen. So you'll see as we talk through these things, learning is a big thing that has happened as I've grown. I learned how to be an engineer when I was at Mississippi State. When I went to this paper mill, I worked with a lot of union guys, and I learned how to listen from them. And they had a lot of insight, and as an entrepreneur, when you go and talk to your customers, you got to learn how to listen to them. Because until you listen to them, you won't know what their problem is. You won't know how to solve their problem. You may have an answer, but you may be answering the wrong problem. So make sure you learn how to listen. So that plant was being closed, and so I ended up going to law school. I kind of had a decision to make. I thought about going to grad school in engineering, and had thought about law school way back when, and made the leap to go to law school. One of the best decisions that I made. It's very different than engineering school. Engineering school, things are black and white, right? You got to calculate how much material you need for that bridge, how strong it needs to be, how many stages in a distillation column. Your answers are kind of black and white. When you're dealing with the law, it's lots of shades of gray. And so I really learned how to study, how to think differently, how to look at the big picture and try and figure out what was going on. From there, I went to Fulbright and Jaworski. It's a large law firm in Houston, and really learned how to be a lawyer there. I worked in the intellectual property department, and I did everything that an IP attorney would do. I learned how to draft patent applications. I learned how to litigate patent cases. I learned how to do trademark cases. I learned how to work with people that were buying and selling businesses in order to validate the IP that they had, make sure that they were truly getting or selling what they thought that they had. Then I started spending more time being a trial attorney. So the last part of my career as a private practice attorney, I spent a lot of time in places like this. It's kind of hard to see, but if you know anything about patent law, the Eastern District of Texas is the patent hotspot of the world. There's more patent cases filed in this courtroom, which is in Marshall, Texas. It's smaller than Starkville. It's one judge and a magistrate. That one courtroom might handle 500-600 patent cases a year. So I spent a lot of time in that courtroom dealing with patent cases, and it was a lot of fun. It was stressful. It was long hours, but it was a lot of fun. And after I did that and learned how to deal with judges and juries and figuring out what I needed to present in order to make my case, I decided that it was time to go to GE. So about 4 years ago, I went to GE, and at each one of these, I learned something new. So I learned how to be an engineer at the state. I learned how to listen when I went to that paper mill. I learned how to be a lawyer. I learned how to be really an advisor at GE, and that's what my role is at GE, is to advise not only the engineers but also the business decision makers on how to protect the innovation that they create every day. What's the best way to do that? What's the best way to manage that? And a lot of it, quite frankly, is not legal work. It's really advocating. It's educating, making sure that they know what to do, how to do it, when to do it. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So anyway, that's kind of my background, how I got here, how I got to know what I know. And so what I'm going to talk to you guys about today is just 10 things that I think that everybody, not only every entrepreneur, but everybody ought to know about IP. It's probably not the only 10 things. There's probably 10 different ways that we could do it. So again, as I go through this, if you got a question, stop me, and we'll do our best to answer it. So number 10 on the list, know what it is, right? Everybody tosses the word around a lot, but know what intellectual property is. And that's going to be the thing that you need to do from the beginning. Make sure you know what your intellectual property is when you're working on your projects. It's really anything that's creation of the mind. It could be a literary work. It could be software. It could be that process that you come up with in order to make that next new product. It could be that actual product. But it's all things that you create with your mind. And then you reduce them to practice, and you create those things. You create that novel. You create that software code. You create that widget that you're going to try and hopefully make some money on, right? At the end of the day, that's what it's all about, right? You want to be able to make some money off of it. So know what it is. And then know how to protect it. Just because you've got it and you wrote a novel doesn't mean that you can protect it with a trademark. So you got to know how you protect it. You write a novel, you can't protect it with a patent, right? The only way that you're going to protect that novel is with a copyright. So you got to know how you can protect it. And that's what guys like me get paid to do, right? So I sit down with folks like you and I figure out, okay, what's the best way to protect what you've come up with? And we may look at a lot of different things. We may look at, okay, well, what's your marketing going to be? We're going to talk about a trademark. What is your marketing material going to look like? That might be some copyrights associated with it. Oh, you came up with a piece of software that's really cool. It might be trademark. It might be copyright. It might be something that we could figure out a way to get a patent on. It depends on the situation. We'll talk through a little bit more about each one of these different types of IP next. So I'm going to start with trade secret. Tell you a little bit what it is. And like I said before, one reason why I think this is important is because, we're talking $5 trillion of things that are kept as a trade secret. And when you think about trade secrets, the one thing to know is there's a lot of well-known trade secrets that are out there. Now, I doubt very many people know what the algorithm is. There's only a handful of them that know what the Google algorithm is, right? Not very many folks know what the secret blend of herbs and spices are. The Coca-Cola folks mix their formula up at a couple of different places, so not everybody knows it. You may have saw that one. That was the one that's been in the news most recently. I would say the last 5 to 10 years, there was a secretary that somehow had access to the safe where they kept the formula. And she called up somebody over at Pepsi and said, hey, I've got the formula. You want to buy it? I'll sell it to you for $1 million. And the Pepsi guys were smart. They called up the FBI and said, hey, somebody's offering to sell us the Coke formula. She was arrested and put in jail. And the reason why I say the Pepsi guys were smart, because if they had bought the formula, right, they would be getting sued for billions of dollars from the Coke company for misappropriation or stealing of that trade secret. So they were smart and knew what to do when that happened. But trade secrets are big business. What's interesting about these folks is that they've spun their trade secret into a marketing campaign. So they've combined it with their trademark, and they've really leveraged it even more by combining these two together. But these are all trade secrets that y'all hear about every day. And they go to great lengths. I can't remember if it was, I want to say it may have been KFC, but somebody did a big campaign where they rebuilt their security area. They went and bought a big safe. There was a big promotional campaign that talked about they hired a former New York City cop to carry the formula around while they rebuilt it, and so that you can do some interesting things by combining these with some press if you're smart about it. But the thing to remember about trade secrets are three things, right? it's got to be a secret. Now, that doesn't mean it has to be absolutely secret, that nobody has ever known any bit or piece of it. It needs to be generally secret. So as long as you've got something that's generally secret, they don't know your formula, even though all the parts of your formula are out there, they don't know your formula. That's why you'll see on the back of it natural, flavorings or something like that. Generally secret, number one. Number two, you've taken reasonable measures to protect it, right? You can't go throw it on the desk in the back room and say that's reasonable measures. And we could spend the next 2 days talking about reasonable measures, but you've got to make sure that you take the time to put firewalls on your network and put it in folders that are password protected. Maybe use encryption. Depending on the value of that secret, the more of these different tools you've got to do in order to protect it. And the last thing that it has to have is value. Value because it's not generally known. So when you have these three things together, you've got a trade secret. And what's really cool about a trade secret is the trade secret is something that can last forever. As long as you keep it a secret, and you do the reasonable precautions to protect it, and it's got value, it can be a trade secret as long as you keep that secret going on. These other things that we're going to talk about, they have a shorter lifespan. Patent's only 20 years and the like. But trade secret, you can keep it around as long as you can keep that secret. It's something that doesn't cost you a lot of money. We'll talk about patents. You've got to spend $20,000, $30,000 in order to get a patent. Here, you just got to make sure you keep it a secret. So it's something that is very easy to do. It's something that can be very valuable to keeping your information a secret. Now, one thing I'll say is, if the thing you're wanting to keep a secret, you're going to go sell it to somebody, and then all they got to do is go take a screwdriver and take it apart, and they can figure out the secret. That's not a reasonable measure, right? That's something that can be reverse engineered. You don't want to do that as a trade secret. It's got to be something that you can really keep a secret. But as long as you can keep it a secret, what's really great about it is it's effective for presentation. It's a powerful tool. But the minute you slip up, you just lost it. It's no longer a trade secret. It's out there in the wild. Anybody can do whatever they want with it, compete with you. So if you're going to go down that path, you've got to be very diligent on it. Yes, sir?
If somebody does have to reverse engineer your trade secret, can they then go and patent it and then they own it and you
Usually not. There could be some ways where it depends on what it is, right? So it really depends on what it is. There are some things to where there would be an argument that the prior art was out there. So if you're able to reverse engineer it and you were selling that product, that would be prior art, and it wouldn't. There might be some ways to where you might have something that you can argue that someone was using usually it's a process, right? You got some chemical process that's behind closed doors and all you're selling is a product. You can't really reverse engineer that chemical process that was made to create it. So if somehow they came up with that same process, they might be able to go get a patent on it and block you from doing it. But if you were selling the product and they reverse engineered it, probably not. Probably not. So you just have to be very careful on it because $5 trillion worth of value all of a sudden goes poof because somebody forgets to, use an encrypted Wi-Fi spot and, it's out the door. So patents. This is the one that everybody hears the most about. This is the one that everybody thinks the most about. It's in the news. There's people fighting every day about whether or not you should have a patent at all because, we were talking about it about lunch, in terms of drugs, right? Everybody is up in arms over certain drugs because of the cost of the drugs, and you have the monopoly that's there. But the thing to remember about a patent is just because you get a patent doesn't mean you have the right to practice what your patent does, right? A patent only gives you the ability to stop someone else from practicing your invention. So that's what the cartoon's supposed to represent there, right? So you can only stop somebody else from doing something. It doesn't mean that you have the right to do anything. And the example that I would give you is a rocking chair. So let's say that somebody had a patent on a chair. So the patent on the chair says that, you've got a patent on something that has a flat surface and at least three legs, right? So now you got a stool, right? Flat surface, three legs on it, you can sit on it. Now you come up with the idea of, I'm going to put a back and I'm going to put the rockers on the legs. So now when you look at it, you still have a flat surface because you've got a bottom on it, but you've got a back and you've got the rockers and you got four legs. Well, the earlier patent that said a flat surface with at least three legs can stop you from making your rocking chair. So now what do you got to do? You got to go talk to the guy that has the patent on the stool and say, hey, can I get a license from you? Or can I buy your patent so that I can make my rocking chair? Now you have the ability to stop somebody from making a rocking chair, but now they've got to get something from both of you in order to make a rocking chair. So the fact that you get a patent doesn't mean that you can do anything. It only means that you can stop somebody else from doing it. So be very careful on that aspect of it. Yes, sir. As long as they stay in China and your patent's in the United States, absolutely. No. The patent gives you the right to stop anybody else from selling, making, offering for sale, having made, or importing into the United States that patented invention. So the fact that it was made in China, not a problem, right? My patent is in the United States. I go to China, I have it made, I haven't infringed anything because it was made in China. But the minute that I say, hey, Mr. So-and-so down in Jackson, Mississippi, would you like to buy this chair that's patented? You just committed patent infringement. The minute that you put it, the person in China puts it in the box and ships it, and it comes through customs, you just imported it. And now there's been an infringement. So you have to be very careful on that. But a patent allows you as the patent holder, patentee, or the patent owner to sell it, to stop them from making, using, selling, offering for sale, importing, whatever the patent covers, right? But if you go and get your patent, and now you think, hey, I've got a patent on making a red widget, I can go make them, you still may get sued by, may not get sued by anybody, you may get sued by 10, 15 other people. It just depends on what's out there. So that's something, we'll talk a little bit about that, right? Making sure that you know what you're doing before, what's out there before you go down that road. So what can you get a patent on? In order to get a patent, you've got to have 5 different elements to it. And if you look through these, you'll see one thing is patentable subject matter. I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But the main things that you hear about in what you have to have a patent is it's got to be new, meaning that nobody else out there has ever done this before. And the laws have been changing, and now it's pretty much they haven't done it anywhere in the world. But anywhere you can find information, what we call prior art, right? That documents, hey, somebody's made a red widget before. Here's the paper that describes it. So it's got to be, can't be anything out there. So it's got to be new. It's got to be non-obvious, right? So what does that mean? So somebody made one part of the chair, right? Somebody's made the bottom and the legs. Somebody else has made the back for something else, and you're combining those two together. So you can look at one piece of prior art, you can find part of the invention, you can find part of the invention in this other piece of prior art, and really all you're doing is combining the two together. You really haven't invented anything new. You just said, oh, well, I'll put these two together and I got something new. That's obvious under the law. And so it can't be non-obvious. So it's got to be something that really is making a new, really bringing something new, making a significant change. And as I was saying before, the whole thing about a patent is you get the ability for 20 years from your filing date to stop somebody else from making or practicing that patented invention. Well, in exchange for that, you're in order for the government to grant that to you, right? You've got to prove to them it's new and it's non-obvious, but you've got to then disclose all of your invention to the public. And so that's this enablement part, right? So you've got to describe in your patent application enough about your invention so that somebody else could go and practice it. If you don't describe enough of it, then you're not going to get a patent. because the patent is really a tool that the government is using in order to encourage math and science in research and development, and the private sector for working in that space. And if you spend your time and your money and your effort working in that, and you're willing to disclose it to the public, not keep it as a trade secret, right? So now I've got something, I'm going to disclose it to the world, then they're going to give you a limited monopoly for 20 years so that you're the only one that can practice that. That's the barter that's going on.
Jerry, you mentioned a couple times the consequences of not doing something like full disclosure, you don't get a patent. But sometimes, as we know, the patent office, some people say makes mistakes.
Oh, absolutely.
Issues patents anyway. So what happens if you do get the patent?
What happens if you do get the patent?
Yeah, and you haven't met some of these standards.
So it depends. If you get the patent, you haven't met some of those standards, and like 90% of the other patents in the country, it's never used. It goes, somebody gets a nice ribbon copy, right? They get their picture with it, they frame it, they put it on the wall, and it's never used ever again, nothing is going to happen. But if it's one of that small number at the top, right, that, really 1 to 2% that are really valuable, but that small 5-10% that are somehow trying to be enforced, then there can be a lot of litigation that goes on, right? So I was telling you earlier that I spent a lot of time in Marshall, Texas in the courtroom, and that's usually what we were arguing about. We were arguing about, was it really new, was it really non-obvious, and had you really enabled this? This in there. And the patent office, I forget the statistics, it's been a while since I looked at them. I want to say last year they issued a couple 100,000 patents, right? We're up in the close to 9 million patents that have been issued since the beginning. They issued a couple 100,000 of them last year. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to, some stuff that shouldn't get through is going to get through. Some stuff that probably should have gotten through doesn't get through, and people give up. They're going to make mistakes, and if they're the ones that are in that class, then you're going to fight over them. You can either go to the patent office and try and challenge it, and that's what we would do in the company that I work for, right? We'll keep an eye on what our competitors are doing. We'll see a patent pop up and we'll go, oh, wait a minute, that's a problem. And then we will look at, okay, well, what have we done? What can we identify that might be what we call prior art, right, that shows documents that we did that first or somebody else did that first. We might go oppose that patent and try and either stop it from issuing, or if it's already issuing, try and get it revoked. And if it ends up being part of litigation, then it gets even more expensive. You do it in front of the court, and spend several years. I mean, these things, one of the last cases that I handled before I went to GE was a case involving liquid smoke. I don't know if y'all are familiar with the different liquid smokes that you can go buy at the grocery store to flavor meat and things. My client made a compound that arguably was liquid smoke, but it also was a browning agent. If you look at the chemical structure of it, it's very similar to what they use as spray-on tan. You spilled this stuff on you, you turn brown real quick. And the whole fight was over whether or not our compound, my client's compound, was tasteless, right? And if you used the little concentrated vial that he sold, it was just nasty, bitter. It was obviously had a lot of taste in it. But if you diluted it down to the level that you had to use it at and apply it, there was no taste to it. And so that case had been going on when I got involved for probably 5 years. I was involved in it for at least 2 more years before we went, and we never ended up, well, we had gone to court, but we never went to trial. And it took another 2 years to settle it out, to resolve that issue. So this is something that took almost 10 years to resolve. So that's one of the bad parts about the patent system, right? Is when you get into these fights, or the ones that are truly valuable, it can take a lot of time and a lot of money, which makes it hard on the small guy. But if you're a small guy and you play the game right, you can flip the tables on the big guy and have the upper hand on him. So patentable subject matter at the top. So what all is it that you can get a patent on? Compositions, so different chemical compounds. Obviously, pharmaceuticals are one that's always in the news. Obviously, genes and genome is one that it was in the news a lot before, not so much anymore. Machines are the most obvious one that would be out there. Typically, if you talk to me, you might hear me calling them apparatus. So that's usually, we talk about apparatus claims, or method claims, which is the product by processes or processes that might be out there in order to make something. And there may be other ones where we talk about a kind of a hybrid claim, right, where we say this is, we made some product, but we made it by this specific process. So there's some hybrid claims that are out there. But really, it's compositions, machines, and processes are the main categories. Another big one that's in the news these days is software. There's been several cases from the Supreme Court that have come down that really kind of reined in what you can and can't do in terms of patenting software. And there's a lot of fight still going on there. Yes, sir.
If you have a product or a machine and you make an innovation, say you have a patent on it and you make an innovation to the year and you patent.
If you want to cover that new improvement, yes. So, you've got a machine that, does A, B, and C, and now you add D to it, right? And so it does something different than what you did before, and it meets all those prior, criteria that I had, right? It's new, it's non-obvious, it's patentable subject matter, you enable. And yes, if you want to protect it with a patent, you need to get another patent on it. And if you look at the patent landscape, the majority of everything that's out there is exactly what you're talking about. These little incremental improvements to everything. There are very few patents that are kind of the seminal, disruptive technology that's really just something new, right? Most of them are, I made my widget be a little bit faster, a little bit smaller, a little bit, take your pick. And they found a way to patent whatever that new improvement was. That's the vast majority of them. Very few of them are just, something nobody's ever seen before. So, patents, trade secrets, two of the big ones. The ones that the product folks get more involved in, not necessarily as much of your designers and your engineers, but really your marketing folks. That's the part of the business that I deal with most on this, are your trademarks, right? So we'll spend a few minutes on that, but trademarks are very important. That's that brand part of the equation that I was talking about before. So what can be a trademark? Anything that's distinctive. Anything that you can use to identify where that product comes from can be a trademark. It can be a word, it can be a color, it can be a sound. So can anybody think of a color that's a trademark?
Hashtag 660.
Right, I heard John Deere, so the John Deere green. What were you saying?
States maroon.
I don't know if they've registered that one. I need to go check. That's a good one. It possibly could. That might be a little difficult because you've got other schools that are that have maroon colors, so it might be difficult to get that one. So I heard the John Deere green, IBM blue. I don't know if they've trademarked that one, but they're very possible.
Corvette red.
Okay. There's one very specific one that I'm thinking of that is famous in trademark cases that I haven't heard yet. John Deere's, yeah. No, it's not that one though. Pink Panther. Think of the Pink Panther. What product uses the Pink Panther to advertise?
Insulation.
Owens Corning insulation. It's colored pink. There's no reason why that insulation needs to be pink. It's pink because that shows that it's Owens Corning insulation. That's probably the most famous. If you talk to a trademark person, that's probably the most famous pink colored trademark. There's another famous case, and I can't remember the brand, that dealt with iron covers that are used in your dry cleaners. And the reason why it's famous for trademark law is the color can't be functional. So if the product is pink because that's the only color that it will come out naturally, you can't get a trademark on that. And so there was an argument that these covers that were gold, that the gold was, they tried to argue that it was functional, and that's what that case stood for. You can have a color be a trademark as long as there's nothing functional about that trademark or that color to the goods or services that you're trying to cover. But distinction, what we mean by that distinction, right, is what you're trying to do with a trademark is when somebody sees that logo, they see that M state on the jersey or whatever, they know that whatever is associated with it is coming from Mississippi State, or IBM, it's associated, so the quality of the goods and services that you're getting, and that value that it brings is called goodwill. And that's why when you look at the balance sheet, you see this line item for goodwill, that's really all the value that brand name is bringing with it. The sound one is interesting. Anybody have a guess as to who might have tried to trademark their sound? Harley Davidson is one. I don't think they got it. I think that they ended up getting rejected because they said it was functional. The chimes for NBC are trademarked. The Lion's Roar for MGM is another one. There's a number of the You've Got Mail for AOL was actually a registered trademark. There's a number of it. So there's a bunch of different ways that you can get that. So the one thing I want you to think about with trademarks, so if you're working on your new product, your new whiz-bang thing, and you want to come up with this name to name it, there's a spectrum from descriptive to fanciful, right? And so you don't want to be over here on this end of the spectrum. You don't want to have something that's descriptive, because when you go to the trademark office and you try and register that, you're not going to get it, because they're going to say, hey, somebody else is going to have to use that to describe their products. And Electronic was a company that sells electronics, right? So it sounds very much like what they're selling. So they were not going to be able to get it, at least initially. Now you use it for about 10 years, they might give it to you after that. But the further you go away from that, something that's suggestive, you might get it, the battery is ever ready, right? Arbitrary. Apple has nothing to do with a computer or with an iPhone or anything else. So it's arbitrary. Fanciful or just made up words. Exxon, Kodak are all fanciful. The more you get to that other spectrum, the more that those are instinctively distinctive, and the patent office, or the patent and trademark office rather, will grant you that trademark. It's something that's going to be easier to get, easier to generate that goodwill associated with it. So if you're thinking of those new names, try and go towards this end of the spectrum as you do it. So copyright. So again, with everything else, this is the right that's going to protect those written works, your books, your software code, your advertising material, your photographs, your images that you create, sculptures, music, all that kind of stuff, and things that can be copyrighted. Again, you get a limited right to keep others from using that copy. You control what's been done with it, or what will be done with it. It attaches once you create it. You guys may see a lot, that Circle C and the name of the company and the year down the bottom. Used to be you had to put that on everything in order to put the world on notice that you were claiming the copyright in that. Not so much anymore. You can get away with not putting that on there and you still get your copyright right in it. You also don't have to go register it in order to get your copyright in it. It attaches at creation. Now if you want to go sue somebody because you think that they're violating your copyright, then you got to go register it. You can do that later. So the one thing to know on that is it attaches at creation. Still probably a good idea to put the Circle C in here, but you can get away without doing it. So anyway, that's kind of a quick run through of really the four primary types of IP: the trademark, trade secret, patents, and the copyrights. And again, those are the four things that when you're working on your innovation and you're looking at your companies that you're trying to start, think about those four things. You may not need a patent because you're playing in a space where the product is going to be, around for 5 years. 5 years from now, it's no longer here, or it's been completely redesigned. Patent may not be of any use for you, so you don't need to spend the money on it. Software sometimes falls into that space, right? Some of the folks that deal with software don't really think a whole lot in the patent space because they're constantly churning and it's constantly being moved. There may be other products that are that way. So think about what it is, what the lifespan of that product's going to be. Is it something that's easily reverse engineered? You might lean towards a patent. Is it something that's easy to detect if they would be infringing? You might lean towards a patent. If it's covering the software, you might lean towards obviously the copyright. So just think through those things. Find somebody that can be your advisor on those things, and as you'll see at the end, have that plan at the beginning. Document it. Did I skip over one? Oh, yes. So get the rights that you need. So open source is something that is in the news a lot today, right? Everybody does a lot of software, and it's easy to go to an open source library and you pull down some code. A couple hours later, you're getting close to your piece of software, and you never looked at the license that attached to that piece of open source code that you stuck in your piece of software. And the open source licensing runs the gamut from something that's very friendly, that says, hey, you can use this, you can do whatever you want with it. All you got to do is put a little notice that says, hey, you got this from me in your software. You don't have to do anything else. Then there's the far extreme that is copyleft type stuff that actually takes all of your IP rights away from you, right? If you take their software and you add their code into yours, their code takes over, and now you may have to disclose your code to the next person that comes along. Whoever you sell it to may say, "Hey, I want to see the source code to that." And so you may be okay with that, and you may not. So when you're dealing with things like open source, make sure you know what the ramifications are of the license that attaches to what you're working with, right? You may not want to share it. You may be more than happy to share it. But make that decision knowingly as opposed to just grabbing it and going, all right? Same thing goes for anything else that you're doing with anyone else. If you work with anyone else, make sure that you put it in writing, right? A gentleman's agreement, a handshake, and everything, while it may be enforceable in court, you're going to spend a lot of money with somebody like me trying to go enforce it, and it's going to be a he said, she said, and you're not going to be happy at the end of the day. So put it in writing, get an agreement in place, and to the extent that you can, do it on your paper. If you can have your own agreement that's written up, that's the standard agreement, use that one. Because if you're starting from somebody else's, they're going to have their preferred terms, and they may be taking a lot of the rights that you may not that you may need. And one other quick note is think ahead. You may negotiate the rights to something that covers your product as you know it today, but that might be that minimum viable product that you got going out the door today. It may not cover what you're ultimately trying to sell. So make sure that you get the rights that you need at that time. We just hit on that in terms of the documenting it, making sure that you document it and you get the rights that you need on those. So think before you share. This goes to that trade secret component, right? You may have a patent on the widget. You may have a trade secret process on how to make the widget. You got a trademark that covers the name that you're selling the widget on, and you've got a copyright on the control system logic that covers the process that makes the widget. So you've got all these different things that are there, but your control system engineer needs to know the copyright part. Your marketing folks need to know the trademark part. Your mechanical person or your design person needs to know the process part, right? Everybody has a part that they need to know. But the guy that's writing the software code may not need to know anything about some of these other parts of the process. And so when you're when you're dealing with all that information, share it with those people that have a need to know it. And when you are doing that with somebody that's not a part of your organization, put an agreement in place. I call them NDAs. Some people call them confidentiality agreements, right? They control how that information can be used, who they can share it with, and at the end of the day, if they go beyond those areas, right, you've got some recourse in order to hopefully recover some value that may have been lost if they disclose some of that confidential information. But limit that to what you share. Put firewalls in place, store it encrypted, and all those other things. But the simplest thing that you can do is just think about it. Does this person really have a need to know it? If they don't have a need to know it, then don't share it with them. Same thing with your vendors. If they don't have a need to know it, don't share it with them. And think about that agreement on who they can share it with. The last thing you want to do is share it with a vendor and not limit who they can share it with, and then they get to, through an affiliate, get it to somebody that might be a competitor. So just think through those processes. Make sure that you've got agreements in place, and you'll be in better space. Survey the landscape. When you're looking at the start of a project, one of the things that I recommend, and this is something that we try and do in our engineering teams at the very beginning of the project, right? You've got a goal at the end of the day that you're wanting to come up with this new widget. Go and look at the landscape. What patents are out there that are in that space? Because what you don't want to have happen is just go and, we know where we want, we got our concept, and you come and you knock on your attorney's door at the end of it, and you've got your final design, and the attorney goes, well, that's great, but what about these 5 patents that I just found that look like they read on exactly what you're doing? And then what happens usually with that is the engineer or the project lead goes with their tail tucked between their legs back to their office, because they now know that they're going to miss their deadline, because they've got to go back to step 0 and start all over again. Or better, they've got to sit with me in a room for the next 2 days as we try and figure out how do we design around it. How do I get you out of this problem? So now they've lost time, it's costing them more money. And if they had just spent time at the beginning of their project to go and look at the patent landscape and look at the competitive landscape, what are other folks doing? Do they have any IP on that? What are the patents that are out there? They could have avoided a lot of that time, lost time and lost money. And it's something that's very easy to do, right? And if it's something that you don't have the skill set, you don't have to hire an attorney to do it. You can hire somebody that does only those things in order to get you that landscape. The other thing to think about that is to do the next thing, right? And that's to look for the holes. This is something that we call a white space analysis. So we're looking for the spots where there is no IP that's protecting it. We're looking for those holes. And so you see on this chart that's up there, right? All the holes that are in there. And so what we love is when those holes match up to what our product leader says the customer wants, right? There's a hole. There may be a hole there for a reason because it's a really tough technical challenge, or it may be a hole there because nobody's thought of doing that yet. And so we look at those holes and we say, are those things that we can capitalize on? Can we go and create some IP to fill those holes and get a product that's better and sell? And if we do that, then we're fairly confident that we're avoiding the landmines that we were talking about on the one before, and we can really sew that space up. So those are 2 things that you can use at the beginning after you've sat down and you've talked to your customer to find out really what they need, right? You listen to them, you ask the why do you need that, and get to what they really need. And then you go and look and see, well, has somebody else already invented that? And maybe that when you go and you do, when you do this one, you see what you're needing is in that hot spot right there. And you may figure out, hey, you know what? That company went out of business, and Bob Smith owns the patents for that. And I can call up Bob Smith or whoever Bob Smith transferred those to, and I can buy those patents, or I can get a license to those patents. Or maybe something that you can do with that. But if you do it at the beginning as opposed to the end, whenever you're getting a phone call from Bob Smith that says, hey, I got a patent that reads on what you do, and I want you out of business. Now you're spending a lot of money, or you just lost your entire investment. So look at those things ahead of time. So just kind of trying to sum up the last two things on these things, right? So remember three things. Identify your IP. So as you're going through these things, figure out what it is, identify it, clear it. So work through and try and figure out, is there any IP rights of somebody else that I'm needing to steer clear of? And if there is, how do I steer clear of it? Can I get rights to it? Can I work around it? And then once you've figured that out and you've got what it is that you're going to be going to market with, figure out how you can protect it. And it could be those patents, it could be those copyrights, it could be those trade secrets, any one of those things. So do those three things, and you'll be in much better shape. I was talking earlier about documenting. So when the default rule in most every country in the world is whoever creates it owns it, right? So with the exception of an employee that works for a company that signs an agreement that says, if I invent anything that's related to the company or based on any information that I get from the company owns it. If it wasn't for that document that almost every company makes you sign, you would own the invention. So if you've got a team of 4 folks that are working on it, and y'all don't have an agreement in place as to who's going to own the IP for the project, and each one of you come up with a different part, each one of you would own that part of it. And let's say all 4 of you came up with the idea together, the 4 of you together would own it. And now, if you don't have an agreement in place as to who owns it, or you don't have an agreement in place as to who's going to own it if the company goes belly up, or you don't have an agreement in place as to who's going to own it whenever you can't agree on what the decision should be, all 4 of you have the ability to go and use that IP. And that may not be the best thing to do at the end of the day. But if you're a company, if you work for a company like me, you want to make sure the company has those rights. So you've got to get an agreement in place with your employees, with your vendors, with your customers, and everyone else as to who's going to own the IP. And it's a very simple document that can be created that says, I agree to assign and do assign all the IP that I create related to this area to the company. It's a paragraph. And if you don't do it at the beginning, you got to do it when it's created, or trying to do it afterwards. It's always messy. So think through who's going to own it. Have that prenup in place if you're doing some sort of partnership as to who's going to own it whenever things go south. Unfortunately, not every business ends up becoming the next Google. And if you have that in place, right, you may have a pile of patents that are sitting in there. And I can tell you a number of the patents that I litigated in the Eastern District of Texas were patents that were from a business that started. They had some really good technology. For whatever reason, they weren't able to turn it into a going concern, and the company went belly up. But they still had this set of patents that were sitting there. And they sold those patents to another entity that then took them and found a way to enforce them on someone else. And so they were generating revenue off of that. But if you don't have the ownership of those IP rights cleaned up, you can't even do that. So think about it. Make sure you document who's going to own it and know where it's going to go. So the number one thing, though, with all of this is have a plan. Your plan may be, I don't want to spend the money on patents. I'm going to have something that's only going to last for 2 years. Don't need it. I'm not interested in capital, from venture capitalists that are out there. I think somebody was talking to me about lunch about patents and Shark Tank. One of the things that some of these VC companies look at is, do you have any patents? And you get some instant credibility because you do. If you're not interested in those things and you don't need to spend the money on patents, great. Have a plan about it, what you're going to do with it. Have a plan at the beginning of these projects on how you're going to deal with it and what you're going to do along the way, and you'll be in much better shape, and you won't wake up at the end of the way and not have it. So just have that plan. That's about it, I think. So we can do questions now.
Sure. So they've been asking questions all throughout the class, and I've seen now a handful asking what sparked the change from engineering to law school when the paper plant was going on. What made you shift careers?
Shift careers. So if you know anything about the paper industry, most of the... You want to answer the question?
I was the one.
That partially correct, right? So if you know anything about paper mills, they're not in garden spots of the world, right? They're usually out in the middle of nowhere. They're often in towns smaller than Starkville. The company that I was with had approached me numerous times. Your next role is tech manager, or whatever the next role is. We think that the next tech manager spot's going to be in, Bacomo, Canada, or Bucks, Alabama, or take your pick. And one of the ones in Canada, in order to get there, I had to fly to Washington State. I think I had to fly to Seattle, and then take another flight from Seattle into Canada. There's like a 2-hour flight or an hour flight into Canada. Get in a car and drive for 3 hours. Most people at that mill did not live there. The workers that worked there all had little travel trailers that they parked in a little camp. So they drove up on Sunday night and they slept in the travel trailer until Thursday night, and then they drove back home. And so that just wasn't on my top 10 list to do. And obviously my bride was not very fond of that location either. So I knew the plant closing was coming, and started looking at what the alternatives were. One option obviously was trying to kind of take that skill set that I had as a control systems person and go apply it in the oil industry in Houston. I knew that I would probably be starting over to some degree, and not being going in at the same level that I was. So knowing that I was going to have to start over to some degree, I started looking at what other things were out there. Had thought of law school while I was in undergrad, and got a lot of encouragement from my wife that I should consider going that route, and so I did. And one of the better decisions that I made. Definitely learned a new way to think, and regardless as to whether or not I'm in court in front of a judge and a jury, or working for a company like GE, or teaching trade secret law, as I'm going to start doing in the spring at the University of Houston. It gave me a tool set to do a lot of different things. And I think you see a lot of lawyers out there that they do stuff all over the world.
Speaking on the trade secrets you mentioned, teaching that course, a student asked if you recover a lot, or if you lose a trade secret, what kind of tactics can you take to recover that?
Depends on why you lost it, right? So if it was your mistake and you lost it, there's not a whole lot of recourse that you have there. You can try and do some things to try and put the genie back in the bottle, but it's kind of hard to put the genie back in the bottle once you've done that. Now, if the reason why you lost it is because you shared it with somebody under a non-disclosure agreement, or that was shared with somebody that had a fiduciary obligation in order to keep it secret, then you can go down the road of litigating, right? Or if it was somebody that they were sneaky about it and they were able to more or less steal it from you. In those instances, there are civil remedies as well as criminal remedies that are available. Civil remedies would be suing in civil court, either in state court or federal court, for what we call trade secret misappropriation, and that's really a polite way of saying that they stole it from you. But it's not a criminal proceeding; it's a civil proceeding, and you're seeking your damages are either your lost profits or the lost value of the trade secret, and that can be big numbers. I mean, some of the trade secret misappropriation cases I've seen numbers that are in the millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, over the disclosure of that confidential information. The other side is the criminal side, and that's something that I've been very involved in, and that is when you have typically an employee that tries to steal your trade secrets from you. And it could be that engineer that or scientist or someone else that they developed it, right? And so they feel that it's theirs, and they feel that they don't necessarily always feel that they're doing something wrong, but they're taking that trade secret information that belongs to the company, and they're trying to take it away with them and go use it, either sell it to somebody else or use it as their own to compete against you. And in those cases, you work with you can work with the state at the state level with law enforcement. Typically, you work with the FBI, and you have a trade secret theft case. There's two different versions. There's economic espionage, and in order to have economic espionage, you got to have a foreign state involved. What you typically hear about these days is China, right? There are about 5 or 6 Chinese military personnel that are wanted for trade secret theft, economic espionage, that are all due to the hacking. So you kind of hear it in the hacking sense, right? What happens more, though, is what we call the insider threat. It's your employee, it's your trusted supplier that you've shared your confidential information with that has tried to steal it and go use it. You refer that case to the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office. Economic espionage case, you can go to jail for 15 years and be subject to fines of $10 million and restitution up to 3 times the value of the trade secret. If it's not a state actor involved, then it drops down to 10 years in jail and a $500,000 fine and restitution. I forget the limit on the restitution. So I have had 4 cases where I've dealt with that, where I've worked with the FBI and the AUSA, and 2 folks that were convicted of trade secret theft because of that. They were trying to take our information and start up a competing business. One of them tried to steal our a formula used to make one of the components in a oil well. Actually, the piece of equipment everybody's probably heard a lot about from the Gulf disaster. It's called a blowout preventer. There's some components that are on the inside of that. There's the formula on how to make that. Another one was a gentleman that unfortunately was approaching retirement, saw that there might be some layoffs at the plant, and decided to go and take the information he needed in order to repair some tools and try to work with another employee to start up a competing business. We've had 4 or 5 others where we've, different levels that have had that. So it's, if you go to the FBI website and you look at their top priorities, trade secret theft is their number 2 priority in terms of things that are out there. So Homeland Security, trade secret theft.
We have time for just one more question, and we're actually tight on it, but I want to ask it because it's a good one. When looking at a patent and the cost there, this student asked, how do you know, if you don't know if your invention will sell successfully, how do you evaluate whether to pursue the patent or not? And what do you guys do at GE with that case? We're in a lot different position than a small startup, right? We even though we're in rough times in the oil and gas business, we've got a lot of wherewithal with the entire GE company. So we may lean towards filing a patent on something that is, we're going to do a little research and confirm that the odds of us getting a patent are pretty much there. But we're going to have a lot of conversation. We're going to bring some outside players in. We're not going to listen to just the engineer that says, hey, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. I mean, every engineer is going to think whatever they came up with is pretty cool, right? So we're not going to listen to just the engineer. We're going to bring in the marketing guy. We're going to bring in the product line leader. We're going to listen to them talk about what we think those estimates are for the market.
For us, it's probably a bigger deal in terms of where we're going to file than if we're going to file, right? So for us, we're looking at, are we going to file a patent in the U.S. and in China, Europe, Australia, Latin America? So we're looking at, when we're talking about patent dollars, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, not $20,000. So we're really looking at where. So we're talking to them, well, what's the projection 10 years out, 20 years out in terms of revenue for this product in these places? So we're trying to get all that analytics in, right? What can we do to make a good decision there? What I would say to you is this: look for a way that you can extend that period of time to make that decision. A lot of what you're going to do, especially if you listen to like lean startup methods, right? You're going to be pivoting. You're going to be trying to come up with that idea. If that's not the one that works, let's pivot and change. So do things that are inexpensive for you. File provisional applications. Provisional applications are cheap. To the extent you can do it yourself, do it. The attorney in me tells you go talk to an attorney, but some of this you can do yourself. But file a provisional application. You can file a provisional application for $100 and utilize things like a PCT application. PCT application is an international application, but what's really nice about a PCT application is you get 3 years to figure out what am I going to do. And you don't get you're not able to go file an application in every country in the world, but you get 3 years to figure it out. And then as long as the country that you need to go into, and most of the countries that you want to go into are part of the PCT, you can do it at that 3-year mark. So hopefully that gives you a little more time to evaluate the situation and make that decision. And you delay all the expense of the filings for 3 years. So that would be the two things that I would say. Look at provisionals, look at a PCT, bring in as much information as you can to help make that decision.
All right, well, thank you for coming.
Thank you all. And I'm happy to the extent somebody has a question and it didn't get answered, happy to